All right. Hey there, Emry. How you doing today?
Doing well. Yeah, happy to be here.
Great. Well, welcome everyone to our live today with Emry. He is one of our keynotes for Publisher Forum Scottsdale. Great to have you, Emry. Just a fun fact for everyone, Emry and I both attended Temple University. We are both Temple grads, so shout out to us. So, Emery, we talked before, and you mentioned having to adapt to a lot of skills over your 17-year career in ad tech. And I was just wondering, can you share some of those skills and traits you associate with individual success as a publisher?
Yeah, sure. So I think, like, for starters, when I think about skills relating to a career as a publisher, I think there's something unique about the work that we do, and it's that, at least traditionally, this isn't something that is formally taught in schools as a specific career. And I think with that as the reality, there are some there are some positives to that, and there are some drawbacks. On the positive side, I think it creates a career opportunity that has people of all different backgrounds. And this actually applies to myself as well. Like, this is not necessarily something most people today thought they would be doing. And I think that's good because it gives diverse perspectives in the field, and that's a positive. On the more challenging side, though, I think for a new emerging career, it can be harder. And your question reflects this. What are the skills needed to succeed? And in the question, you use the word adapt. And that's not one of the things that jumped to my mind, but I think it is a key contributor to success, because this is such a fluid career where you have to be able to adapt to a rapidly changing environment. Um, in addition to that, I think the ability to just take and invest time in your work is essential here. So I get that investing time is going to be a critical component of literally every career. But what I mean specifically here is we are all internet consumers. It's a part of our day-to-day lives. And when you're working as a publisher in that capacity, you are taking from the experiences that you have online and seeing what could be applied to the work that you do. So if you're enjoying that and it's something that you are, open to all the time, then it becomes sort of a piece of your life. You're taking the positives and the negative experiences and integrating that in your work. Um, Additionally, I feel like hustle is a bit of a cliche as a category, but it's really applicable to the work that publishers do, because it's such a rapidly changing environment and the problem sets are never the same. In terms of just pure, like, skill sets, I think probably the most critical is analytical ability. Being comfortable working with data, understanding, reading data, managing it, and drawing results from data. However, I pair analytical ability with communication ability, because you can have the best data, but without the ability to sort of sell your findings, whether that's internally or externally, it's going to be just less effective what you're doing. Um, and this one always makes me laugh, but I feel like being okay with mistakes is essential in a career as a publisher. And obviously, it goes without saying you don't want to make mistakes, but the reality is mistakes are a part of this role. So you have to be okay with that as a mindset and understand it's a reality of the job, and be able to fail quickly, understand why something didn't go the way that you intended it, and pivot. That's just really pivotal. And then finally, I think the community that we have as publishers is such an advantage. I mean, hopefully this event is an example of that. I think Ad Monsters is a terrific example of this, and it's been really important in my career. But community is such a unique advantage as a publisher. Like, it's so rare to be able to go out to your peers and ask them questions about what's working, what's not working, what are they prioritizing, what are they not prioritizing. And it's just an advantage that I think, as a skill, everyone should lean into.
Yeah, there was a lot of good stuff you said there. I mean, ad tech is definitely not something we learned in school back when we went to school. Now, they might have some options there. And thank you for what you shared about making mistakes. We're made to feel shame sometimes about our mistakes coming up in our careers. And, one thing I go by is it's never a loss, always a lesson learned. So,
Yeah, I also feel like you're just making so many first time decisions in this role. And things just are moving so quickly. If you can pair getting comfortable with making data driven mistakes with, failing fast and being able to pivot, that's going to be essential.
for sure, for sure. So, over your 17-year experience, you had to start somewhere and you've built careers at companies starting from the bottom, right? Zero.
Mhm.
What advice would you give publishers who are trying to navigate, our constantly shifting landscape and then also define their own career path?
For me, anytime we're talking about career path, the conversation is, at a macro level. So what I recommend doing is just taking a big step back, and I have a two-part gut check question that I like to use. The first is, do you enjoy this work? I mean, if the answer to that is yes, you enjoy the challenge and the quick change, then all of this is much easier. On the flip side, I also recommend people think when they look around the industry, is there someone you can identify, maybe more tenured in their experience, but also and critically more tenured in their skill set, and you can identify a person or a number of people that you can say, yes, like that is someone that I would aspire to be like from a career perspective. And the goal of these questions, I mean, yes, is ideal, but more critically, I think if the answer is no, and it's tough to identify anyone that you want to emulate, then I just feel like you want to be able to get to a yes with one of those questions, and that's really important. But from just a more like defining a career path when you're looking at opportunities, I feel like publisher brand is not necessarily indicative of the success or how good of a role you will have. I think my career is a good example of that. Um, but lesser known publishers can offer just as strong of opportunities for people looking for work. Um, I also think when you're thinking about publishers to join, targeting super advanced publishers programmatically or very nascent publishers programmatically is critical. And the reason I feel that way, like with a super advanced publisher, you're going to have the opportunity to specialize, and you're going to be working at the vanguard of the space. And with more nascent publishers that are newer to programmatic getting into it, the challenges will be stronger up front, but then you'll have the ability to make a stronger impact on the business, which I think is critical. Uh, if you're thinking about like what level of impact does programmatic as a business line have for the publisher, I think it's also important to point out like advertising programmatic revenue does not need to be the biggest business line within the company. And my career is an example of that. I've actually dealt with three different scenarios there. At the first company that I worked at, Imagine Easy Solutions, advertising, you mentioned it, we started from zero, but advertising grew to become the biggest revenue line at the company. But from an investment perspective, it wasn't. The biggest investment was the individual subscription and the institutional subscription. Chegg acquired that business, and at Chegg, the individual subscriber was the main focus, and ads were a part of the free service, but not the main focus of the company. And then at Unwind Media, so almost, I guess, 15 years into my career, ads are the sole provider of revenue. And I'm just pointing out, like, these things do not, it doesn't have to be the biggest thing, but it needs to be big enough to matter for impact. I also think if you're thinking organizationally, you need to be careful of companies that don't recognize that programmatic does not mean automatic. They are not. It's not the same to create a connection with an SSP and be given the leeway and the room to build the relationship with that SSP partner. They're just not the same thing. And without that freedom, it's going to be harder for you to be successful. And then finally, and I know I'm saying a lot here, but finally, from sort of a organizational perspective, if you're able to look at the team that you're joining, I think you need to be cautious of leadership that doesn't have an interest in the day-to-day work that you're doing with programmatic. I mean, look, I get there are elements of that of this that are like extreme minutia, but it's critical that that is recognized within the organization for you to be able to grow. And then conversely, and I'll be honest, this is something that I struggled with earlier on in my career when building teams. You also have to sort of be aware of leaders that are very hesitant to give up the most critical parts of their day-to-day, because it's going to be harder for you to grow in that scenario as well.
Definitely. Such a great, well-rounded answer. I see Catherine in the comments, programmatic does not mean automatic. Catherine, you took the words right out of my mouth. I love that, Emry. And then, we have Lynn here. I feel like pubs like Emry DowningHall and Justin Wall and Jarrett Collette have been able to make great stories in ad ops because they've worked at companies that trusted them and allowed them to be agile and nimble.
Yeah, I think both of those comments are speaking to the theme that I'm trying to drive. Like, if you think of programmatic as like, if a company thinks of programmatic as automated pipes, like your success is just going to be so limited. There's such a difference between the most effective SSP partnerships and just starting a partnership up, and the comment totally reflects that. Yeah, completely agree.
Certainly. And then, when it comes to effectively leading and motivating teams, what have you learned about, leading and motivating teams with diverse work styles and expectations?
Yeah, so I think in the work that we do, sort of the default motivator is typically revenue or revenue growth. And I think fundamentally that makes sense, because if you think about it, it's sort of the straightest line and the easiest line to measure in terms of overall success. I also think from a leadership perspective, meaning your boss within an organization, that is typically revenue growth is typically how your effectiveness is measured, or the effectiveness of your business unit. So I guess the solution there is just to create quarters and years of double-digit revenue growth indefinitely, and it's all good. That's a joke, which is always a little harder to pull off here, but I'm kidding. Obviously, the ecosystem makes it challenging to grow. Publishers are facing headwinds from things like AI. Ad performance, or the open market in general, has been relatively flat. And organizationally, there are just changes around strategies that shift, that make it more challenging to always rely on revenue growth. I think importantly to this question, though, inevitably you will come across people in your career that are simply not motivated by revenue growth themselves, right? And I think that's really important to keep in mind. One of the changes that I made very early on in my career when managing teams is I removed the bonus component of a compensation package that was directly related to revenue outcomes. And the reason that I did that was, if you think about what I consider a healthy programmatic team, you want your team to be making decisions that are in the best interest of your business in the long and the short term. Obviously, there are scenarios where you need to think short term, and you want your team to be able to do that, but you don't want it to be the pure motivating factor that is a large percentage of their compensation. The other aspect of your question that I think is really critical and interesting in the work that we do is, how do you motivate, or how do you deal with teams that have different incentives and goals? And the quintessential example in the work that we do is the programmatic yield team and the product team within a publisher, right? Like, primarily the programmatic team is focusing on driving revenue. The product team is focused on user experience and engagement. And that is an inevitable clash at some level. I like to really simplify this, and when working cross-functionally, ask two questions. One is, what are your goals? overall, like what is the cross-functional team goals? And then importantly, what are you solving for? It's super simple, but it's so simple that it's often a step that is skipped over. And something that comes to mind for me in terms of like how I actually experienced and dealt with this. I remember we actually changed the North Star metric for how we track ad success. Years ago, we removed CPM sort of as the North Star for whether or not our ad solution was effective and replaced that with RPS, revenue per session. And the reason that we did that is we wanted to combine the goals of the ad team and the product team. And if you focus on revenue per session, I actually, admittedly, I was frustrated by this change because I didn't understand, like, why are we as the ad team changing our North Star metric to appease a different team? But I was wrong. RPS is a way better way to assess the effectiveness of your solution because it's taking the holistic user journey into account and appeasing the two important teams that lead to success for the user. Yeah, so that's an example that sticks out to me.
Okay, awesome. Great. And the career talk is awesome, but now we want to get into a little bit of a sneak peek into, how you plan to address the balance between the urgency of our industry and the fact that, we're not saving lives here. We don't work in the emergency room, but our industry is very serious and important. So, during your keynote, how do you plan to address the balance between the urgency of our industry and the fact that it's not a life or death type of job? So how do you plan to address that in your keynote?
I love this question. For starters, I would say, despite the mind share, the technology, the data, all of the work that goes into what we do, at the end of the day, we are serving ads on platforms, right? So we need to stop short of calling it a life or death situation. That said, and this is where I think this gets really interesting to dive into, publishers represent the open internet, and the open internet represents journalism, content creators. It's the information that is important for people to consume. It's the way we think about the internet, and it's especially important like right now in an election year, right? Like this is incredibly important work that we do. When I was working at Chegg, our CEO at the time used to describe advertising as democratizing information. And I love that framing because I really think it's not life or death, but that encapsulates how important it is to do what we do in terms of like freedom of information and things like that. And I also think the reality of this work is there is a lot of urgency to it. The internet never stops. It is something that's always on, always being consumed. So there are going to be situations for publisher teams where things go bad, and it can certainly feel incredibly urgent at those times. I guess what I plan to dive into is what a healthy level of paranoia for a programmatic team looks like. What are appropriate expectations? And from a management perspective, as a leader of an organization, how do you go about setting those? For me personally, I think you need to set an expectation that the reality is there will be periods where you need to work later or working on a weekend. But just as importantly, I think good leadership defines for their team what urgency means. But what urgency, when something is not important enough to the bottom line to require that sort of emergency response. So that's what I plan to get into.
The healthy level of paranoia amongst a programmatic team. I got to remember that one.
Yeah, I like that. I like that framing. I mean, a healthy level of paranoia is a bit of a paradox, I guess, but yeah, it is. It's like it is the ultimate challenge for these for our teams in general, because it does also seem like things go the most wrong at the least, at the least convenient times by definition. So
For
I
sure.
guess one thing I would also add real quick to that, alerting is just such a big component. alerting, whether it's alerting of something going wrong or something going right, I think that is a keystone of understanding, like, why are these changes happening in the first place?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I have a question from Lynn. She said, I don't know if I missed this, but how does shifting our North Star metric from CPMs to RPMs enhance our ability to deliver customer value while driving sustainable revenue growth?
Well, so specifically, I was using that example for the second part of the question, which is, working cross-functionally with teams with different goals. I do think for programmatic teams that CPM is a very limited metric to track. I think RPS, revenue per session, or if you have page views that have extended time periods, RPM is just more effective because it involves more people in your organization and ties them into the same goal. If you think about it, revenue per session ties in time on site engagement with an app or a website. And if you're able to increase that, extend that for the user, it gives the ad team more opportunity to serve more ads while creating a better user experience. So tying the two of those things together, I think should always be the aim.
Got it. And then, what are some key questions or big picture trends that you're planning to discuss that you think will be most valuable for publishers to consider as they think about the future that our industry is going in?
Yeah, so the presentation in Scottsdale, a lot of it looks backwards, right? Like I'm looking at a 17-year career as a publisher, taking the hard challenges that I've dealt with, tying those up into what I've learned, and bringing that out in terms of what can be considered best practices for individuals, teams, and organizations based on my experience. The last section of the presentation actually looks forward, and it takes a look at what are the things that already matter today that I think from a publisher investment perspective will only continue to matter more in the future. And I'm going to have 3 of those in the presentation, but let's just talk about 2 of them here to sort of leave it as a sneak peek. So the first one is open market programmatic quality already matters today for publishers, but I think that's just going to matter significantly more in the future. And here's why. We've talked about programmatic as an evolving market, right? Evolving markets improve their ability to measure what is successful and what is not successful in terms of return on ad spend for marketers and advertisers. So if you think about it through that lens, what is considered quality inventory, which is inventory or media that drives engagement, right? I think that will just become more clearly measured and more effective. Then with that in mind, if you think about companies in the space today, I don't know if this is the best term to group these companies. It's kind of tricky, but I've heard the term forensic ad tech used for companies like Jounce Media, Deep Sea, Sincera, or Analytics. I think what a lot of publishers think of when they think of these companies is raising problems in the open market with inventory. But I actually don't think that is the goal of what these companies are doing. I think the key goal and where this will evolve to is they're setting standards for marketers of what effective media buys look like and sort of determining best practices while better exposing the data from publishers. So again, if you think about it through that lens, the more you lean into ad quality, the easier it will be for marketers and advertisers to find your inventory. But sort of with that in mind, we've seen a lot of stories in the past year about MFA or brand safety. And then over the summer, the Trade Desk comes out with SP 500 plus. I think that is a trend that will continue as well. And what they're doing, in my opinion, is creating what they believe is the most valuable inventory. But that is what is going to continue to perform. And I believe there are going to be more inclusion lists like that from other DSPs and other people in the space. And then finally, for this point, if we think about ID bridging, what it is, what value it represents for publishers, and I do think there's value when it's done right. ultimately we are talking about fidelity in a bid request. And to me, that ties directly into ad quality as well. And I'll just go through this other point real quickly. I think this can be somewhat unpopular with publishers sometimes, but I believe sustainability is not a trend. It's here to stay. And again, will only grow in importance. What I tell publishers who push back a bit on the concept of sustainability, not because I don't think they're anti-sustainability by any means, but they don't want to be told what their ad stack should look like. I tell them not to think of it as sustainability, just think of it as improving efficiency. And if you're, you think about it through that lens, it again sort of ties into ad quality. But here's the important point. Publishers that have inefficient ad stacks drive the most QPS, queries per second. That increases costs for SSPs and DSPs. Conversely, efficient publishers, more sustainable publishers, have lower QPS. You're literally a more efficient customer. I think DSPs, SSPs, and advertisers, again, shift spend towards efficiency because it literally costs them less. And I guess the final thing I'll say about this, the green media products that exist today, Scope 3 has 2 of them. Basically what they do is they identify inventory that refreshes too quickly. I believe it's 15 seconds or below, or is chronically non-viewable. To me, when you combine that with the fact that volume-based monetization tactics are already less effective, that is a reasonable place that marketers and brands will continue to lean into, and publishers should as well. So that's all I'll say for now on that.
Okay, great. All right. I did take some notes here. I love how you said sustainability is not a trend, it's here to stay. Because, some out there say sustainability doesn't even exist in our industry, which I think is crazy.
Yeah, no, I do too. But I do think getting publishers in the mindset where it is here to stay, but also thinking about it as just supply path optimization or increased efficiency is a good place to get started. It's not an all or nothing proposition. You can improve gradually.
Absolutely. So one bottom line thing you said is publishers, the more you lean into ad quality, the easier it'll be for marketers and advertisers to find your inventory, which is what you want. I do see a question here. Oh, I put it up there. I would love to know what Emry feels in his number one contributor to his personal success and growth.
That's a great question. So I'll say 2 things. They're a bit general, but I think I have been fortunate enough to work at organizations that we talked about this in the second question, but understood that the work that I was doing with programmatic was a long-term project. When you're building businesses that really don't have programmatic revenue lines, that takes a belief from leadership. And I think being given rope to build and develop and figure things out has really been the key for me. And I'm fortunate that way with the leadership I've had the chance to work with at all 3 of the stops in my career. But the other thing I would say, and I'm not just plugging this because this is an Ad Monsters event, the community is critical. There are so many times I've gone to publishers to figure things out, and publishers have helped me figure things out, whether they were more advanced in their career at the time or they had already dealt with the problem that I was dealing with. And, that's why I try to do the same thing today and give back the information where I can, where I think it's helpful.
That's awesome. So you pay it forward.
Try to.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Emry. That was such a good, informative discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course, I do have one thing to share with our audience before we go. I just want to let everyone know that you have an opportunity to save $300 with this code AdMonsters for Publisher Forum Scottsdale, which you want to be there to hear the rest of Emry's presentation. Also, our Slack community for publishers, we want you to join. If you're a publisher, send an email to Lynn at admonsters.com. And looking into 2025, here is our lineup of events. We will be heading to sunny Fort Lauderdale in March, New York in June, Nashville in August, and Austin in the fall. And yeah, with that being said, thanks again, Emry, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.